Grandma finds trafficking evidence in daughter-in-law's coat. That night, I only went out to pick up a jacket. But when Arthur, the weary old owner of the laundromat, gripped my hand tightly, I knew my life would never be peaceful again. He pulled me behind a curtain that smelled sharply of bleach. In his trembling hands was a clear plastic bag. His voice quivered, caught in his throat. "Listen to me carefully. Before dawn, take the two children and leave this town." I stood frozen, feeling as if someone were counting down inside my chest. Inside that plastic bag was a blood-red transfer slip and a photograph of Sophia and Leo, their faces crudely circled in red. My fingers trembled as they brushed against the cold plastic as though I were holding a death sentence. I gripped the edge of the table, a chill spreading down my spine. That night, I swore to myself, no matter the cost, I would never let those red circles touch my grandchildren. Before dawn, we would either vanish or be found. I slipped the plastic bag into my coat pocket, feeling as if I were carrying a bomb. Outside, the street was still alive with vendors shouting and wheels scraping against the pavement, but inside me was only a hollow, icy void. That night, I went home and tried to cook a simple dinner as if nothing had happened. Yet every touch, the knife, the pan, made my heart leap with dread. Chloe texted to say there was a sudden meeting that she would be late. I read and reread the short message, suspicion gnawing at me. The children played carelessly on the rug. Sophia was building a colorful house out of wooden blocks, while Leo clutched his plastic dinosaur and sang to himself. I smiled at them, but my lips trembled. In my mind, Arthur's words echoed over and over before dawn. When they finally drifted off to sleep, I began to pack quietly. I called Grace, the nurse I trusted most. Her voice faltered when she heard the urgency in mine, but she didn't press with questions. She simply said her brother would send a taxi. I folded clothes in haste: Sophia's favorite blue sweater, Leo's pajamas, with the superhero print, a few cookies, and a bottle of water. Every movement felt clumsy, as if my hands no longer belonged to me. Through the window, the streetlight slashed across the thin curtain like a blade. Fear coursed through me as I pulled the curtain shut, certain someone was watching. My phone buzzed. Grace's message: "The car is at the corner." I woke Sophia gently, telling her in the softest voice to put on her coat, that we were going on a night trip. Her eyes widened in surprise, while Leo rubbed his eyes in sleepy protest. I slipped a candy into his palm. He grinned and followed without a fuss. We stepped into the hallway. The dragging sound of my slippers echoed like a drumbeat. I carried Leo, held Sophia's hand, and rushed out as if fleeing a house in flames. The taxi was waiting. The driver glanced at us in the rearview mirror, his eyes flickering with surprise at the sight of a grandmother and two children with an oversized suitcase. I whispered to the bus station as fast as possible. The night road stretched ahead, the street lamps casting long, twisted shadows of the car. I looked back at our house, shrinking in the distance. It seemed like a black hole swallowing all our secrets. I clutched the suitcase tighter, fear and resolve pressing against my chest. I had to get my grandchildren out of this place. The bus terminal at midnight blazed with neon, crowded like a marketplace. Shouts, rolling wheels, car horns, all tangled in chaos. But it was that very chaos that gave me relief. Among the crowd, the three of us could disappear. I bought 3 tickets to Charleston, the last bus of the night. The clerk barely looked at us, slid the tickets under the glass, his voice steady. "The bus is about to leave. Hurry, or you'll miss it." I guided Sophia, carried Leo, and climbed aboard. The lights flickered, the seats worn and stained by years of use. I settled the children by the window. Sophia hugged her knitted doll. Leo fell asleep on my shoulder, his tiny hand gripping a scratched toy car. I stroked their hair, my throat tightening. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks, erasing our trail. The bus rolled out of the old town. My heart was heavy as stone. Yet in that moment, with the hum of the engine and the steady breathing of my grandchildren, I knew I had done the only thing I could: run before dawn. The road out of town stretched endlessly as if swallowing the bus whole. Inside, the yellow light flickered, shadows shifting. Some passengers dozed off, others clutched their bags like lifelines. I sat midway down the aisle, back, pressed against the cold seat arms wrapped around the suitcase, but in truth, I was holding my fractured heart. Sophia pressed her face to the window, her eyes wide, tracing the receding lights. She whispered, "Where are we going, Grandma?" I forced a smile, offering a sweet lie, to visit a distant relative. "There's a big garden there. You'll see plenty of flowers." She smiled softly, innocent enough to believe, then closed her eyes, doll pressed against her cheek. Leo had been asleep since we left the station, his warm breath brushing against my neck, fragile as a thread pulling me back from the abyss. I looked at his tiny hand still clutching the battered toy car and thought, how could a child like this ever be a target in someone's cruel plan? The thought made my eyes sting, but I lifted my head quickly, unwilling to let anyone see. The window reflected a stranger's face back at me, pale eyes, swollen red hair, disheveled. I wondered when my life had turned into this. I should have been home brewing tea, listening to Chloe talk about her meeting, waiting for Ben's call from Denver. But everything had shattered that afternoon in the laundromat. The grinding wheels on the road sounded like a merciless song. I closed my eyes and memories rushed in. When Ben was little, I had held him the same way during his fevers, spending sleepless nights with damp cloths on his forehead, whispering prayers that he wouldn't leave me. And now here I was again with his children, only this time, the threat was not sickness, but a sinister scheme from someone I once trusted. The bus stopped at a roadside station. Some passengers went for coffee or cigarettes. I stayed put, too afraid that stepping outside meant someone might be waiting in the dark. Sophia rubbed her eyes and asked to use the bathroom. I took her hand, gripping hers, tight eyes scanning the flickering lights and greasy smell of fried food. We returned quickly, and relief washed over me when the bus door closed again. The rest of the ride, I dared not sleep. Every time my eyes drooped, the image of that photograph with the 2 red circles jolted me awake. I sat listening to the drone of the engine, watching the sky outside the window slowly shift. Darkness gave way to pale gray streaks of blue seeping into the horizon. Dawn was breaking, but Arthur's words before dawn made me shiver. Had I escaped in time, or had the chase only just begun? When the bus reached Charleston, the faint light of morning filtered through the cracked roof of the terminal. I carried Leo, held Sophia's hand, and the 3 of us squeezed through the crowd. The station was as noisy as the old town smell of diesel vendors shouting, horns blaring. Yet here, I felt safer. No one knew me. I hailed a small taxi, took the children to a cheap motel downtown. The clerk yawned, handed me the key without care. The room was narrow, musty, the sheets faded and worn. I set down the suitcase and watched the children collapse onto the bed, exhausted. For the first time since the night began, I sat on the chair and exhaled. But in my coat pocket, the plastic bag still waited. I pulled it out. The transfer slip with its staggering number. The photograph with the trembling red circles. My body froze. I shoved it back into the suitcase and locked it tight. Deep down, I knew I wasn't free. This was only a stop. The real escape had just begun. That first morning in Charleston, I woke before the church bells rang. The motel room was silent, pale light slipping through the curtains. I sat by the bed, listening to the children's breathing. Sophia stirred, still clutching her knitted doll. Leo's mouth hung slightly open, holding onto his toy car. The sight pierced my chest with both love and fear. I quietly went downstairs to buy some milk and pastries. When I came back, the 2 of them were already sitting up, their eyes still heavy with sleep. I tried to sound cheerful. "Today, Grandma will take you to see a very beautiful place. There are church bells ringing and a big yard where you can run and play." Hearing that, Sophia clapped her hands with delight, and Leo jumped off the bed, babbling that he wanted to go right away. We stepped out into the street. Early morning Charleston glowed with a pale golden light. Moss-covered rooftops birdsong weaving with the long toll of the bells from St. Francis Church. I held their hands step by step as we passed through the old stone gate streaked with moss. Inside light streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the walls with shimmering streaks of red, blue, and gold. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of old candle wax. Sophia tilted her head back, eyes wide at the vaulted ceiling. Leo scampered to the front pew, tapping the wood with his fingers, making a cheerful clack-clack sound. Father Michael recognized me the moment I walked in. His silver hair glowed under the colored light, his eyes kind yet piercing. He stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Eleanor, it's been so long since you came back here. How are you, and the children? You look worried." I didn't answer right away. I only squeezed Sophia's hand and shook my head. He understood. After the morning service, I asked if the children could play with the other kids in the churchyard under the shade of the great oak tree. Leo ran in circles. Sophia laughed, her laughter echoing like bells. Watching them, my heart felt both relieved and tight with pain. In the small room behind the altar, I sat across from Father Michael. The smell of old wood and candle wax brought memories flooding back. I took the plastic bag from my coat and laid it on the table, my hands trembling. The transfer slip with its enormous figure, the photograph of my 2 grandchildren with red circles around their faces, all lay there like living proof. I told him everything, from the afternoon at the laundromat, the warning before dawn, to the endless bus ride. My voice faltered. Tears fell unchecked. Father Michael listened silently. His hands clasped, his eyes growing heavier with each detail. When I finished, he sighed. "Eleanor, this is no longer a family matter. This is a crime. You need the help of the law." He mentioned Victoria, a young lawyer from the parish. I nodded, a spark of hope flickering in my chest. I stepped back into the yard where Sophia and Leo were still circling the oak tree. The morning sun caught Sophia's golden hair and lit Leo's rosy face. I stood there for a long time, breathing deeply, feeling a new strength rising within me. I knew I couldn't go back to how things were, but at least I wasn't alone anymore. The night before, all I could do was run. But this morning, under the shadow of the church, I saw clearly it was time to face the truth, however cruel it might be. Charleston welcomed us with a damp morning and an almost unbelievably normal atmosphere. I still wasn't used to that false sense of safety. I knew it could be ripped apart by a single message, a phone call, or a misplaced touch of a key. Victoria met me at the church corner, her face so serious it made my heart tighten. She led me into a small room, placed the plastic bag on the table, and removed her white gloves to examine every detail like a hunter searching for tracks. Her words were brief, but enough to make me tremble. "This isn't a personal transaction. It's tied to a shell company built through layers of offshore legal fronts. The writing and the codes in the corner mark an intercontinental transfer. This signature appears in files linked to money laundering and child trafficking." The name Julian Cortez blew through the room like a cold wind. I didn't know him, but the name clung to me like the smell of bleach after that night in the laundromat. Victoria didn't try to frighten me further. Instead, she placed a steady hand on my shoulder, her tone responsible. "We'll work with our federal colleagues, but Eleanor, you must stay calm. Don't call Chloe, don't post anything online, don't tell Ben. If Chloe knows, you suspect the plan will collapse, and things could become far more dangerous." I nodded, my mouth dry as ash. The thing I wanted most was to go to Chloe's house, open the door, and drag the truth out into the light. But that would destroy the legal process that might save my grandchildren. It would expose the plan early and make those behind it even more reckless. I swallowed my anger, choking back the scream in my throat. They led me to another room where 2 men in plain clothes waited, Miller and Davis. Miller was somber, his eyes shadowed as if he'd seen too much. Davis focused on his laptop, typing fast like playing a tune. They listened as I summarized everything once more, then began analyzing the evidence. Fake passports, plane tickets, unactivated phones, stacks of money neatly bundled, everything pointed to a calculated operation, not an impulsive act. They concluded a ruse was needed to draw out the mastermind. They would stage the children's disappearance, pushing Chloe into panic, making her call and reach out to Cortez. When she tried to fix things, the network would reveal itself. The plan sounded cruel, but Miller said something that eased me. "We'll do everything to catch them when they show themselves, and we'll protect your grandchildren." That evening, I sat in the middle of the room staring at the laptop screen where a silent surveillance feed had been activated. The word listening blinked. Then a text from Chloe appeared on my phone. "Mom, where are the kids? I called the police. I'm so scared." I swallowed a sob. At first, I wanted to reply instantly, "They're here safe," and spill everything. But Victoria shook her head, her eyes quietly commanding, "Don't answer. Let her reveal herself." We sat in silence, listening to Chloe's voice over the line like listening to a sad song. Moments later, her call was rerouted, and her trembling voice dialed a strange number. That message was the spark. Cortez's voice came through, "Don't panic. Stay calm. We must have the goods." The word goods dropped like a stone into my heart. My grandchildren targets merchandise. I wanted to scream to tear into the screen, but the law and the plan to save them held me still. The next day, the monitoring began in earnest. Victoria worked tirelessly, coordinating with the federal office. Miller and Davis teamed up with cyber investigators, tracing every transaction, every call. They dismantled the web thread by thread like watchmakers unscrewing a clock. Each piece of data was a puzzle fragment slowly coming together. They spoke of Cortez as a man moving in the shadows with contacts in several European cities, using shell companies and intermediaries to erase his trail. Meanwhile, I kept up the act of an ordinary grandmother. I took the children around the historic district, bought ice cream, new notebooks for Sophia, a small Lego set for Leo. I did everything to keep our routine normal. But inside, everything boiled. Every laugh of Sophia's stabbed me, reminding me that one misstep could cost us everything. I told myself I would endure any temporary pain for a lasting end. The plan advanced. Miller said a key contact moment was coming. They had injected a disappearance into public information to stir Chloe's panic. Fake messages, unknown calls making her rush. I felt tension thick in the air like an invisible net tightening around the predators. One night, Chloe's phone rang from an unknown number. The laptop screen lit with sound. I heard her voice, "Cortez, the kids are gone. Kids are." I called the police. "I don't know what to do." Cortez's voice slithered like someone sipping poison. "Don't shout online. Stay silent. We're still proceeding." They spoke of clients, buyers, deliver. That word deliver instantly turned my grandchildren into cargo. My heart clenched as if crushed in a fist. That night, Miller whispered in my ear, "Get ready. Tomorrow night we make our decisive move." I didn't know exactly what he meant. I only knew I was being pulled into something far larger than I had imagined. They set up a tactical team watching every lead. Cameras were installed. Chloe's phone was tapped. Cortez was tracked. Victoria spoke to me gently. "Your task is to act normal. Whatever anyone asks, say you don't know anything. Remember that." Pretending was a heavy burden. I felt like an actress trying to hold a role in a play where the lives of two children were the highest stakes. Every time Chloe texted me, my heart sank. Once she wrote, "Mom, I searched the whole house and can't find them. Someone broke the lock. Everything's a mess." I wanted to call the police, call Ben, wake the whole town. But they told me to stay silent, that any reaction might destroy the plan. Then came the decisive night. The trap was to be set in a small suburban hotel where a middleman often received messages from Cortez. The plan was simple: stage Chloe's panic, have her approach the intermediary to demand the goods, or push for delivery. And there, when she appeared, the strike team would move in. The date and time were set, every corner covered, the net ready to fall. That morning, I was more nervous than ever. The children were still carefree, unaware. I braided Sophia's hair, tied Leo's shoelaces, looked at their faces as round as coins. Deep inside, terror sat heavy. If the plan failed, they might panic, act violently. Yet I placed my trust in Victoria and the investigators. They had worked quietly for days. They weren't people who often failed. By late afternoon, as dusk gathered, everything shifted into motion. A phone call from Chloe's number to a stranger's line was intercepted, carrying words like arrows straight into me. "I need the goods now. The buyer is waiting. Keep quiet, or else." Miller gave the signal. The tactical team took their positions. I sat in a nearby car, repeating to myself that the end was near. When the order was given, it all moved like a clock, wound tight. Seconds to storm the hotel room, seconds to sweep every corner, seconds before the shouts and the clash of bodies. I heard the crack of a warning shot, but no bullets fired. I heard the snap of handcuffs closing around a man's wrists, the rush of footsteps, the scuffle of clothes. They had Cortez and a few accomplices right there. Chloe appeared in the doorway, pale and frantic. She screamed, stumbled, insisting she knew nothing. The scene unfolded like a reel in my head. Men dragged down, money spilling, phones lighting up. A thin man, black hair tangled, was shoved forward. Cortez. His mouth was bound, evidence clutched in the agent's hands. I saw in his eyes a coldness and a flicker of fear, the look of a cornered beast. Chloe cried, begged, claiming she was forced, that it had all spun beyond her control. I didn't know the whole truth. I only knew the evidence and recordings were enough to take them away. After the raid, the team filed rapid reports inside the vehicle. Documents had been found: fake passports, ledgers, messages, phones containing shocking records of calls. The picture grew clearer, a network stretching across continents, trafficking children into criminal systems. Chloe appeared caught somewhere between victim and accomplice. The final judgment would rest with the law. When everyone was taken to the federal office, Miller told me in his low voice, "The job isn't finished. We need more evidence to convict them." I nodded, feeling a small weight lift. I held my grandchildren tight, exhaustion pressing down at last. They were safe in my arms, that was all I needed. Yet questions churned in me. How could a mother do this to her own children who had manipulated her? How many others were trapped in this network? And would I have the strength to help my grandchildren heal from this scar? That night, Victoria sat with me longer. She laid out the next steps: gathering documents, extracting data from phones, securing procedures for a solid trial. She explained they would need testimony, technical evidence, witnesses. "Eleanor, you did the only right thing. You trusted the truth and handed it to those who can act on it. Now it's time to finish this case together." Her words blurred through my tears. I promised myself I would endure anything, even the most painful days, to protect the children. The next morning, the press was already stirring, but the team worked to shield the case, to keep the process steady. I took the children for a walk, bought them new clothes, and etched every small laugh into memory. Inside me, a fragile peace began to flicker. The law had stepped in, the predators had been shaken, and I, an old woman, thought weak, had risen despite my pain to protect my family. Act 2 closed with the sight of federal cars driving off, loaded with sealed evidence, with Chloe being led away, and with a silence after the storm. But that silence was not an ending. It was the breath before trial, before the truth was unveiled, before the public reckoning to come. The courtroom opened on a cold morning, pale light filtering through windows, scattering dust like shards of truth. The chamber was so silent that even the rustle of paper sounded like measured beats. I sat on the family bench, clutching a small handkerchief to keep my heart from spilling. Ben was beside me, his shoulders taut like a drawn bow. Sophia and Leo sat ahead, brought by their aunt, wide-eyed as though watching a play they couldn't understand. Every gaze turned to the long table where Chloe sat, her eyes flashing now and then like someone struggling to steady a boat in a storm. The prosecutor began in an even tone, not dramatic, simply laying out the facts one by one like stacking bricks to build an unshakable wall. They presented the evidence: the transfer slip with red figures, the photograph with red circles around two small faces, the forged passports, the plane tickets to Madrid under Chloe's name, Sophia's and Leo's. Each piece was laid on the table, the forensic officer's gaze slicing through them like probing the human heart. Each item was not suspicion, but accusation, proof of a chain of acts. When the giant screen projected the enlarged photo, whispers rippled through the room. The glaring red circles over the children's faces were like stains, a vile mark drawn by their own mother. I froze, my throat seized by an invisible hand. In that moment, I knew my emotion was no longer just outrage. It was the collapse of trust, the shattering of cherished memories buried beneath something foul. Chloe's defense tried to build another wall: coercion, threats, manipulation. They spoke of financial pressure, of anonymous threats, of fear that could drive a person past breaking. Their words filled the room with pity and sorrow. But the prosecution countered with cold, deliberate evidence: planned money transfers, tickets, booked in advance passports, prepared ahead of time actions that required time and intent, not the rash panic of someone forced. When Chloe was brought to testify, she did not appear as a monster. She appeared as a broken woman, frightened and confused. At times, she nearly cried with fear. At times, she stifled sighs of shame. At times, she looked at me and Ben with a plea I'd seen in The Desperate. But the prosecution was ready, guiding each message, each number, each line of text, each call, log into a complete tapestry. Every excerpt read aloud struck me like a blow to the chest. The evidence operator pressed a button and a recovered conversation played. Two targets selected. Ensure timely delivery. JC. The voice was still unconfirmed, but the signature was traced, matching the name Julian Cortez in money laundering files. Those two letters, JC, rang out like a seal, a testimony that this was no small fraud, but part of a structured network. When that recording played, a chill swept across the courtroom, like a wind scattering the remnants of broken trust. Next came the witnesses. Arthur, the laundromat clerk, was called to the stand. His voice was hoarse, his hands trembling as he recounted the moment he found the plastic bag in the coat pocket, the transfer slip, the photograph marked in red. He described how he pulled me behind the curtain, how he tore the nylon apart to reveal the evidence, how he could hardly breathe when he saw the red circles. His words were not poetic, they were raw, and that rawness silenced the entire courtroom. His testimony shifted me from storyteller to witness, no longer in control of the narrative, but caught within it. Then Victoria, the lawyer I had only just met, rose like a lighthouse in the storm. She presented the chain of technical evidence: money transfers, forged passports, data retrieved from phones. She named each account, each transaction code, each thread tied to the international network. Her words were cold, precise. I found myself clutching Ben's hand tighter. The weight of technical proof left no room for vague appeals to pity. During cross-examination, the defense tried to twist the story. She is the victim, they argued. She was bullied, coerced. She only did what she thought she had to do to survive. It sounded persuasive, but the prosecution asked the jury to look at the concrete actions: booking flights, preparing passports, communicating with Cortez. Those may not prove murderous intent, but they demonstrated deliberate participation. The court did not weigh motives alone, it weighed actions. And here, the actions were on record. As the trial grew heavier, Ben suddenly stood up. It was a moment that drew the whole courtroom's attention. He stepped onto the floor, his voice trembling but steady. I tried to believe. I tried to hold our family together, to forgive. But with the truth laid out before us like this, I cannot stay silent. I am the father of these children. I will not let them be turned into merchandise. His words broke the air. There were gasps, whispers. Ben looked straight at Chloe, and in his gaze was the end, a relationship cut clean beyond apology or repair. The defense struck back sharply, trying to paint Ben as emotional biased. "Are you sure you have nothing to hide?" "No personal motives," they pressed. Ben answered with silence, a silence heavier than any denial. He had chosen action over secrecy. That silence was stronger than all their arguments. One of the darkest moments came when the prosecution played a recording of Chloe speaking with intermediaries. She never said, "I will sell my children," but the transcript detailed their ages, their health, the terms of transfer, things only a seller would concern themselves with. As the audio played, Sophia lowered her head as if some unspoken dread reached her. "I wanted to gather both children in my arms, shielding them from that cruel truth." Chloe broke down in tears before the court. At times she screamed, at times she went mute, at times she denied everything. But as evidence piled higher, the image of the coerced victim grew fragile. Experts were called, cyber engineers, financial analysts, explaining how transactions were concealed, how passports were pre-made, how intermediaries abroad linked the chain. Their words were scientific bricks, building a wall against manipulation by tears or blurred memories. At one point, the defense called a colleague of Chloe's. He testified that she had spoken of money troubles, of wanting a way out of poverty. Sympathy stirred faintly in the room. But the prosecution's response was sharp. Desperation may drive choices, but to turn one's own children into commodities is a choice beyond cruelty. The evidence showed Chloe was not merely coerced. She prepared, she acted. The trial dragged on all day. Back and forth testimonies, counterpoints, evidence layered upon evidence. Each hour drained my spirit. I remembered the night at the laundromat, Arthur's trembling hands handing me the plastic bag, the blood-red numbers on the slip. Those memories now stood in court as immovable stones. I asked myself, how could a woman I once welcomed into my home be drawn into such a crime? But my heart knew the answer no longer mattered. The truth was already laid on the table. Finally, after hours of argument, hundreds of pages of records, dozens of recordings, the prosecution concluded there was enough to convict. Their closing words were simple, strong, declaring this was organized, deliberate, systemic. When court adjourned for deliberation, I stepped outside and drew a deep breath. There was no rush of joy, only a hollow ache. Justice was near, but wounds would not vanish with a verdict. Outside, reporters swarmed, cameras aimed like predators, devouring every flicker of emotion. Ben bowed his head, wrapping the children in his arms. I stood still, gazing at the gray sky, telling myself that whatever the outcome, I had done the right thing, stepped out of the fragile role of grandmother, wielding truth to protect them. The trial closed its cross-examinations with a weight that was heavy yet necessary. Lawyers now prepared for the final phase, deliberation and judgment. I gathered my scattered emotions into one phrase, etched inside me. Forgiveness may be possible, but forgetting never will be. Today we stood at the front lines of justice. Tomorrow the verdict would be written in black and white, and the children's lives would continue under a new shield they deserved. I stood there, the gray sky like a curtain that would not lift, my heart caught between relief and grief. The trial moved into deliberation. Lawyers withdrew, the courtroom thinned, leaving behind only weary eyes. In the hallway, strangers approached with questions, cameras followed, but I shook my head, refusing to speak. Ben held the children close. I knew now all of society's gaze was fixed upon us, a sacred, bitter weight. When the court called us back, everyone returned to their seats in silence. The air was compressed, each breath measured. The judge entered, footsteps echoing softly, then sat. All eyes turned to the gavel. In that moment, the ticking in my mind tightened, every second cut deep. The curtain of life was about to be pulled back. The jury's findings were read, lengthy, meticulous. They broke down the evidence, the testimonies, the recordings, the forensic proof. each argument stripped apart as cold as an equation. I did not follow every legal term. Instead, I felt each piece like a brick in the wall of justice. One by one, they formed a barrier against evil. When the reading ended, the judge lifted his gaze toward Chloe. His voice was unyielding as he read the charges: conspiracy, participation in organized crime, involvement in child trafficking, and several related offenses. Chloe crumpled her lips, trembling, tears streaming. Pleas, sobs, they rose like waves, but to the judge they were merely weak attempts at mitigation, insufficient against the weight of what had been done. Cortez and his accomplices were named as masterminds, as coordinators, their sentences announced under the cold letter of law. The gavel struck. Sharp. Final. The verdict was delivered. A part of the weight in me burst like a wave, not from revenge, but from recognition. Recognition that evil would face consequence. My eyes blurred, but these were not only tears of betrayal, they were the tears of a woman utterly worn. Ben gathered the children and gathered me too, as if the three of us could share the fragile safety of that moment. As the crowd dispersed and reporters closed in, Victoria pulled us aside into a corner of safety. Her words were short: the case was not fully closed. International leads remained threads to pursue in dismantling the network at its root. She reminded me of my role in the ongoing investigation, the testimonies yet to give. I nodded, feeling a heavier duty fall upon me, not only to shield my grandchildren now, but to stand in this fight so that other children might never become prey. The night after the trial, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a tangle of images: the photo with its red circles, the transparent plastic bag, Chloe being led away, the clink of metal cuffs, and her eyes, at times familiar, at times panicked, at times disturbingly calm. I asked myself about the nature of humanity. How can someone both cradle a child and count them as merchandise? There is no easy answer, but the question itself made me more cautious in every decision that followed. The days afterward passed, but not peacefully. We moved into a smaller apartment near the church where Father Michael often visited. Life returned to simple routines: breakfast, school drop-offs, afternoon games, and sometimes therapy sessions for the children. Sophia was haunted by images of the paper and the red circles. Sometimes she would wake crying, calling Mom in her sleep. Leo at times grew suddenly afraid of the dark. We took them to specialists, and slowly, step by step, they learned how to face it. Victoria and the agents kept working. Documents and international leads widened. Accounts were frozen. Shell companies, tracked agencies in Europe contacted. Each time a name was arrested or a chain broken, I felt a flicker of hope. But I knew that building a safer world required more than one verdict. It required change, awareness, vigilance. In the return of ordinary days, there were gentle moments that felt like waking from a nightmare. One afternoon, Sophia ran into the room with a brightly colored drawing: a house with a red roof, open doors, and two children holding hands. "Grandma, this is our home," she said. I hugged her, my heart melting. Those small things were the reason I had done everything. I wanted the children to have the right to draw, to sing, to live, without ever knowing the cruelty of red circles. Sometimes I looked at myself and saw a stranger, someone who had moved from fear to action, from confusion to resolve. I once thought I would always be fragile, trembling before anything large. But the truth is, ordinary people can do extraordinary things when love compels them. I did not feel pride, only gratitude for the courage that carried me forward, and I knew our healing journey was still long. One evening, Ben spoke to me about the future. He would file for divorce. He wanted safety and custody. I nodded, a knot twisting inside me. The loss was more than just a missing person. It was the erasure of an old picture of family. But we needed safety, and sometimes safety demands painful acceptance. I supported Ben not out of anger, but to protect the children's future. Time has its way. It softens wounds without erasing scars. As years passed, Sophia's smile grew brighter and Leo learned to play soccer running across fields without looking back. I kept a journal where I wrote about those harrowing days, about the people who helped us, about the laughter that saved us. In it, I wrote short lines: I forgive you, not forget. I kept that phrase as a boundary to teach the children. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, it does not mean forgetting. Once at the market, a woman looked at me and asked, "Don't you get tired of retelling something so painful?" I smiled and answered, "Stories like this must be told so others know. If you ever see a red circle drawn on a child's photo, please don't stay silent." She nodded, and I felt a spark of hope that our story might awaken at least one more person to vigilance. The ending came not with applause, but with ordinary mornings, walking the children to school, cooking meals, telling bedtime stories, teaching them that the world can be cruel, but that there are always hands ready to hold theirs. I knew I had lost much, but I also knew that truth, even cruel truth, has the power to heal when faced injustice. And that is what I chose to keep in my heart: never silence, never concealment, always holding the truth for those who have no voice.